Sometimes the thing you've been running from is waiting for you at home. Sometimes trust arrives in the most unexpected moment, between two strangers who need each other to survive. In 1882, mountain man Gideon Cross returned to his Colorado cabin 3 days early. The young woman staying there, a seamstress named Eleanor, pressed her finger to her lips the moment he walked in. "Quiet," she whispered. "Don't move." Gideon froze. Eleanor wasn't afraid of him. She was terrified of what she'd found hidden beneath his floorboards. What started as simple shelter became something neither expected, a mystery involving stolen gold, dangerous secrets, and a connection that would change both their lives forever. What was hiding in that cellar? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The cabin sat at the edge of where civilization gave up trying. Gideon Cross had built it with his own hands 12 years ago, choosing this particular bend in the valley because it caught the morning sun just right, and because the nearest neighbor was a full day's ride away. That distance suited him fine. He was a man shaped by solitude, tall and lean, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of hard winters and harder choices. At 45, his dark hair had gone silver at the temples, and his hands bore the scars of a life lived outdoors: rope burns, knife cuts, the pale line across his left palm from a Cheyenne arrow that should have killed him during his cavalry days. He didn't talk about those days much. Didn't talk much at all if he could help it. The cabin itself was simple, but solid. One large main room with a stone fireplace he'd mortared himself, a sleeping loft reached by a ladder, and a root cellar dug deep enough to keep supplies frozen through the worst of winter. The floor was packed earth covered with pine planks he'd hewn and sanded smooth. 2 windows faced east and south, their shutters reinforced against storms and the occasional curious bear. Everything had its place: his rifles above the door, his traps on pegs by the hearth, his few cooking implements hanging from iron hooks he'd forged at old Pete's trading post down in the valley. It was a life of routine and order. Wake before dawn, check the trap lines, hunt when the larder ran low, chop wood, mend what needed mending. In summer, he'd guide the occasional hunting party for cash money, though he turned down more jobs than he accepted. Didn't need much, and didn't want the company. The mountains gave him everything he required: game, clean water, timber, and most importantly, silence. Then Eleanor arrived, and the silence ended. It had been 2 weeks ago, late afternoon, the sky threatening snow. Gideon had been splitting logs when he heard the horse approaching. Visitors were rare enough that he'd reached for his rifle before even looking to see who it was. Old Pete came into view first, leading a second horse with a woman in its saddle. "Gideon," Pete called out, raising one hand in greeting. Pete was 70 if he was a day, with a white beard stained yellow from tobacco and eyes that missed nothing. He ran the trading post in Silvermine, the nearest thing to a town within 50 miles. "Got a situation here that needs your Christian charity." Gideon set down the rifle but didn't lower his guard. The woman sat straight-backed, despite obvious exhaustion, dressed in a traveling coat that had once been fine, but was now road-worn and dusty. Her dark hair was pinned up beneath a bonnet, and her face, pale and fine-featured, held the kind of careful composure people wore when they were barely holding themselves together. "This here is Miss Eleanor Hartwell," Pete said, dismounting with a grunt. "Come all the way from Philadelphia. Stage broken axle 2 days south of here, and she needs a place to stay until the snow clears and she can get a passage north to Denver." "I have money," Eleanor said quickly, her voice cultured but tired. "I can pay for room and board. I don't need much. Just a corner and a blanket. I can cook and mend. I won't be any trouble. Gideon studied her. She met his gaze directly, which he respected, but there was something else there too. A wariness, a need to prove herself trustworthy. Running from something, he thought, or someone. Winter's set in hard, he said finally. Could be weeks before the pass clears. I understand. I don't have much in the way of accommodations. 1 room. I'd take the loft, give you the main floor. That would be more than adequate. Pete shifted his weight, clearly relieved this wasn't going to be difficult. Knew you'd do right, Gideon. Miss Eleanor here's had a rough journey. Coach driver was drunk, passengers were crude. She needs somewhere safe and quiet. Something in the way Pete said, it made Gideon look at the old man more carefully. Pete's eyes held a message. This woman needed help, the kind that didn't ask too many questions. Gideon nodded slowly. You can stay. No payment needed. But I keep to myself, and I'd appreciate the same courtesy. Relief flickered across Eleanor's face. Thank you, Mr. Cross. You won't regret this kindness. But as Pete helped her down from the horse and brought in her single battered trunk, Gideon wondered if he already did. The first few days had been awkward. Eleanor kept to herself as promised, speaking only when necessary, moving about the cabin with quiet efficiency. She'd brought her own supplies, tea, some dried goods, a sewing kit in a worn leather case. That case seemed to be her most precious possession. She kept it close always, and Gideon noticed the quality of the silver needles inside when she sat by the fire in the evenings, mending clothes by lamplight. She was skilled with a needle, that much was clear. Her stitches were tiny and precise, the kind of work that spoke of years of practice. She'd offered to repair his shirts, and he'd accepted, curious. When she returned them, the tears were invisible, reinforced with such care that the fabric was actually stronger than before. You do fine work, he'd said. I was apprenticed to a dressmaker when I was 12, she'd replied, in another life. She didn't elaborate, and he didn't ask. Slowly, a routine developed. Gideon would rise before dawn, stoke the fire, put coffee on to boil. Eleanor would wake to the smell and come down from her pallet near the hearth, already dressed, her hair pinned up. She'd make breakfast. She was a better cook than he was, turning his simple provisions into surprisingly good meals. After eating, he'd head out to check traps or hunt, and she'd clean, mend, or simply sit by the window with her sewing. Evenings they'd share the fire, usually in silence, though occasionally she'd ask a question about the mountains or the wildlife. And he'd answer. Her questions were intelligent, thoughtful. She listened when he spoke, really listened, and didn't fill silence with chatter. He found himself appreciating her presence more than he'd expected. The cabin felt less empty. There was coffee waiting when he came in from the cold. His clothes were mended. The place smelled of bread and wood smoke instead of just leather and gun oil. One evening, about a week into her stay, she'd looked up from her sewing and said, I want you to know I'm grateful for your trust. I know you're taking me on faith, and that means something. Gideon had been cleaning his rifle. He paused, considered his words. We all need a place to stand sometimes, ground that doesn't shift. She'd nodded, eyes bright, and returned to her work. But something had changed between them in that moment, an understanding, unspoken, but real. The day before Gideon left for his hunting trip, Sheriff Tom Hastings rode up. Tom was a good man, honest but not imaginative, who'd held the position in Silvermine for 6 years. He and Gideon had a cordial relationship, built on mutual respect and distance. Gideon, Tom said, accepting a cup of coffee. Heard you had company. Miss Hartwell, stranded by weather. Tom nodded. then lowered his voice. Wanted to let you know. Been some inquiries. Man came through last week, well-dressed, asking about a woman matching her description. Said he was her husband. She'd run off. Gideon kept his face neutral. What did you tell him? Told him I hadn't seen anyone like that. He moved on north. Tom paused. Thing is, Gideon, he had a mean look about him. The kind of mean that comes from the inside. If she did run, I'm thinking she had good reason. Appreciate you letting me know. Tom set down his cup. Watch yourself. Man like that might come back. After the sheriff left, Gideon had thought about mentioning it to Eleanor, but decided against it. If she wanted to tell him about her past, she would. Until then, it was her business. Next morning, he'd packed his gear for a week-long hunting expedition into the higher country. Elk were moving with the weather, and fresh meat would see them through the rest of winter. Eleanor had watched him prepare, then asked, "Will you be safe?" Done it 100 times. I know. But still. He'd looked at her then, really looked, and saw genuine concern in her eyes. It had been 15 years since anyone worried about whether he came back from the mountains. I'll be careful, he'd said, and meant it. Good, because someone needs to come back and appreciate that venison stew I'm planning. He'd smiled, actually smiled, and headed out into the cold. That had been 4 days ago. He'd planned to be gone a week, but a storm was building in the north, the kind that could trap you for days. He'd made his kill, a good bull elk, and decided to head back early. Better to weather the storm at home with a solid roof than in a lean-to. Now, as he approached the cabin with the elk quarters packed on his horse, smoke rising from the chimney, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt like he was coming home. The door was slightly ajar, which was unusual. Eleanor was careful about the cold. Gideon dismounted quietly, his instincts from old cavalry days rising up. Something wasn't right. He pushed the door open slowly. Eleanor stood in the center of the room, her face pale, her finger pressed to her lips. "Quiet," she whispered. "Don't move." Gideon's hand moved instinctively toward the rifle slung across his back, but Eleanor shook her head frantically. Her eyes darted toward the floor, toward the corner where the trap door to the root cellar lay hidden beneath a braided rug. He understood immediately. Someone was down there, moving with the silence of a man who'd spent years hunting and being hunted. Gideon eased the door closed behind him and set down his pack. His eyes never left Eleanor's face, reading the fear there, the exhaustion. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "How long?" he mouthed. She held up 2 fingers. 2 days. She'd been dealing with this alone for 2 days while he was up in the high country. Eleanor gestured for him to follow her to the far side of the room, away from the cellar. When they were as far as the small cabin allowed, she whispered so quietly he had to lean close to hear. "I heard noises 2 nights ago. Scratching, movement. I thought it was a raccoon or maybe a fox that had gotten in somehow." Her voice trembled slightly. "I opened the trapdoor with your shotgun ready. There was a man down there, bleeding. He'd somehow gotten in through the old ventilation shaft on the hillside." Gideon knew that shaft. It was barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through, and the opening was hidden by brush. Someone would have to be desperate to use it as an entrance. "He's been shot," Eleanor continued, "in the shoulder and side. The wounds are infected. He's been feverish, in and out of consciousness. I've been cleaning the wounds, giving him water. But he needs a doctor, Gideon. He needs help I can't provide. Why didn't you ride for town?" Her eyes met his. "Because when he was lucid enough to speak, he begged me not to. He said if I brought the law, They'd kill him. He said there were men after him, bad men, and they were the ones who shot him. And you believed him? I don't know what I believe. But I know a gut-shot man when I see one, and I know he would have died if I'd left him. I couldn't do that, Gideon. I couldn't just ride away and let him die in your cellar. Gideon studied her face. There was steel beneath the refinement, a core of strength he was only beginning to understand. She'd been alone in this cabin with a wounded stranger for 2 days, tending his wounds, keeping him alive, all while knowing riders might come looking for him. "Show me," he said. Eleanor lit a lantern and led him to the trapdoor. Together they lifted it, revealing the ladder descending into darkness. The smell hit him immediately. Sweat, blood, infection. Gideon took the lantern and climbed down. The root cellar was small, maybe 8 feet square, with shelves along the walls holding preserves and stored vegetables. In the corner, on a pile of blankets Eleanor must have brought down, lay a man in his early 30s. He was lean, with dark hair plastered to his skull with sweat. His shirt had been cut away, revealing bandages wrapped around his torso. The bandages on his shoulder were stained dark red. The man's eyes fluttered open as the lamplight fell across his face. They were grey, fever-bright, but intelligent. "You're cross," the man whispered. "She said you'd come back. Who are you?" James Hartley." He coughed, wincing. "I'm sorry about your cellar. Wasn't planning on staying, but I couldn't make it any further." Gideon knelt beside him, examining the wounds with practiced eyes. He'd seen enough bullet wounds during his cavalry years to know what he was looking at. The shoulder wound had gone clean through, which was good. The side wound was worse. The bullet was still in there, and infection had set in deep. "Who shot you?" "Men who want me dead for what I know." James's hand moved weakly to a leather satchel lying beside him. "It's all in there. Everything." Gideon opened the satchel. Inside were some personal effects, a pocket watch, a few dollars, a small Bible, and a folded piece of paper. He pulled it out carefully and moved closer to the lamp. It was a map, hand-drawn, showing what looked like mountain terrain. Several locations were marked with X's, and a route was traced in what Gideon realized with a chill was dried blood. Someone had marked this map with their own blood. "What is this?" "Insurance," James said. "And a death sentence. That map shows where Dalton Creed hid the gold from the Silverton mine robbery." The name hit Gideon like a punch. The Silverton robbery had happened 3 months ago, and it had been brutal. The mine's owner and 5 workers had been killed, their payroll of $50,000 in gold coins stolen. The territorial governor had sent federal marshals, but the thieves had vanished like smoke. It had been the biggest news in Colorado for weeks. "You were part of it." "No." James's voice was fierce despite his weakness. "I worked at that mine. I was there that night. I saw what happened. Tell me." James closed his eyes, gathering strength. When he spoke again, his voice was steadier, the words coming in a rush, as if he'd been holding them in too long. "I was doing inventory in the office. Late shift. Around midnight, I heard gunshots in the bunkhouse. I hid under the desk. 5 men came in, led by Dalton Creed. He was the mine foreman. We all trusted him. He shot Mr. Silverton point blank, took the payroll from the safe. I watched him do it. The other workers? Already dead. Creed's men killed them in their sleep, made it look like an outside job, like bandits. But it was Creed all along. He'd been planning it for months." Gideon felt Eleanor descend the ladder behind him. She moved close, listening. "Why didn't you go to the law?" James laughed bitterly. "I tried. Rode straight to town, found Sheriff Hastings, told him everything. But by the time we got back, Creed had planted evidence, made it look like I was in on it. Said I'd killed everyone and he'd barely escaped. My word against his, and he had 3 men backing his story. So you ran. What choice did I have? Hastings wanted to arrest me. I knew I'd hang. I took off into the mountains, been running ever since. Creed's been hunting me, knows I can identify him. 3 days ago, his men caught up to me near Canyon Creek. We fought. I managed to shoot one of them, took this map off his body before the others drove me off. Gideon looked at the map again. One of Creed's men had this? They've been trying to find the gold. Creed hid it somewhere in the high country, but he kept the location secret even from his own crew. They're as eager to find it as the law is. That man I killed must have figured out where Creed stashed it. Or Creed gave him the map for some reason. Maybe. All I know is, with that map and my testimony, Creed hangs. Without it, I'm just a fugitive. Eleanor spoke softly. There's something else, Gideon. James reached into the satchel again, this time pulling out a small leather folder. He handed it to Gideon. Inside was a daguerreotype photograph, the image slightly faded but still clear. A young woman held a small boy in her lap. She had James's eyes. My sister Sarah, James said, his voice breaking. And her son Tommy. She's in Denver, dying of consumption. I haven't seen her in 2 years. The money from the mine, my wages. I was sending it to pay for her treatment. Now she has nothing, and I can't even get to her because every lawman in Colorado thinks I'm a murderer. Gideon looked at Eleanor. Her eyes were wet with tears. The doctor said she has maybe 3 months, James continued. I wanted to clear my name, get the reward for recovering the gold, use it to save her. Stupid, I know. But I couldn't just die in a ditch and leave her alone. The reward, Gideon said slowly. For recovering the gold? Governor put up 5,000, enough for Sarah's treatment and then some. But I can't get to the gold alone, not like this. And I can't trust anyone. Before Gideon could respond, Eleanor suddenly gripped his arm. Listen! From outside came the sound he'd been dreading. Horses, multiple horses, approaching the cabin. James's face went white. They found me. Gideon moved fast. Eleanor, get up the ladder. Act natural. I'll hide him better. There's no time. Do it. Now! She climbed quickly. Gideon pulled the blankets over James, then piled root vegetables and old crates around him, making it look like a storage corner. It wouldn't fool a thorough search, but it might work for a casual glance. He climbed up, lowered the trap door, and kicked the rug back into place just as heavy footsteps sounded on the porch. The door burst open without a knock. 3 men stood there, snow dusting their shoulders. The one in front was tall and handsome in a cruel way, with ice-blue eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. He wore a badge on his chest, a federal marshal's star. Afternoon, the man said pleasantly. Name's Dalton Creed. I'm a federal marshal, tracking a dangerous fugitive. Mind if we come in and ask you a few questions? Gideon's hand rested casually near his rifle. Don't recall inviting you in, Marshal. Creed's smile widened. Now, that's not very neighborly. We've been tracking a murderer for 3 months. Man named James Hartley. Killed 6 people in cold blood over at the Silverton mine. We have reason to believe he might have come this way. Haven't seen anyone. You sure about that? Man's wounded, desperate. Might have broken into a cabin looking for shelter. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice steady. My uncle and I have been here all week. We haven't seen anyone. Creed's eyes shifted to her, and Gideon saw something flicker in them. Recognition, calculation. Your uncle, is it? Funny, I heard Gideon Cross lived alone up here. I'm visiting from back east, Eleanor said smoothly. Staying through the winter. Is that so? Creed looked around the cabin, his gaze lingering on details. Nice place. Must get lonely up here. You wouldn't mind if my deputies took a quick look around, would you? Just to put our minds at ease. The two men behind Creed moved to enter. Gideon stepped into their path, his voice hard. I mind plenty. You got a warrant, Marshal? Creed's pleasant expression didn't change. Now, don't make this difficult, friend. We're on official business. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. The easy way is you turn around and ride back down the mountain. I told you I haven't seen anyone. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Then Creed's smile returned, colder than before. All right, then. We'll be on our way. But let me give you some friendly advice, Mr. Cross. James Hartley is wanted for murder. Anyone harboring him is guilty of a crime. That's a federal offense. Could see you hanged right alongside him. Appreciate the legal lesson. Creed tipped his hat. We'll be around. This territory's not that big. If Hartley's up here, we'll find him. His eyes shifted to Eleanor one more time. You take care now, miss. Dangerous country for a lady alone. They left, and Gideon watched through the window as they mounted their horses and rode west toward the higher trails. When they were out of sight, Eleanor exhaled shakily. That was him. The man James described. I know. He'll be back. I know that too. From beneath the floorboards came a weak voice. You should have turned me in. Now you're both in danger. Gideon walked to the trap door and lifted it. Maybe so, but your sister needs you alive, and I don't hand innocent men over to murderers. James looked up at him, tears streaming down his fever-bright face. How do you know I'm innocent? Because Dalton Creed just proved it, Gideon said. That wasn't a federal marshal at my door. That was a killer trying to find the last witness who can send him to the gallows. Eleanor moved beside him. What do we do? Gideon looked at the map spread on the floor, then at the photograph of Sarah and her son. We get the gold, he said. We get the evidence, and we make sure that son of a bitch hangs for what he did. The terrain grew rougher as they climbed. The trail, little more than a game path, wound through dense pine forest and across open meadows where the snow lay thick and unmarked. Gideon led, reading the land with eyes trained by years of cavalry scouting. Eleanor followed close, her horse picking its way carefully over the frozen ground. They didn't speak much. The silence between them was comfortable now, built on shared purpose and growing trust. But as noon approached and they stopped to rest the horses, Eleanor broke the quiet. Tell me about your wife. Gideon looked up from checking his horse's hooves. Why? Because you understand loss. I can see it in you. And because if we're riding into danger together, I'd like to know who you are. Really are. He was quiet for a long moment, then settled on a fallen log and gestured for her to join him. She sat, waiting. Her name was Catherine, he began. We married young. I was 23, she was 19. Met her at a church social in Kansas. She had red hair and green eyes, and she laughed like water over stones. Eleanor smiled. She sounds lovely. She was. Too good for a cavalry scout, everyone said. But she didn't care. She followed me from post to post, lived in tents and rough quarters, never complained. Made every place we stayed feel like home. You loved her very much. More than I knew how to say. Gideon's hands worked unconsciously at a piece of leather, an old habit. After 5 years, she got pregnant. We were both so happy. Thought maybe I'd leave the cavalry, settle down somewhere, raise a family. He stopped, and Eleanor waited patiently. There were complications. The baby came early. The post-doctor did what he could, but... His voice roughened. She died giving birth. The baby, a girl, died an hour later. I never even got to hold her properly. Never got to tell Catherine goodbye. Oh, Gideon. I buried them together in the post-cemetery. Then I resigned my commission and rode west. Didn't stop until I found that valley. Built the cabin. Tried to build a new life. He looked at her. Tried to forget. But you can't forget love. No, you can't. Eleanor reached into her coat and pulled out a small silver locket on a chain. She opened it carefully. Inside was a miniature portrait of a dark-haired child with serious eyes. Charlotte, she said softly. My daughter. She was 5 when she died. This locket holds a piece of her hair. Gideon looked at the portrait. The child had Eleanor's refined features, her mother's quiet strength already visible in her young face. She's beautiful. She was. Bright and curious. She wanted to know everything. How birds flew, why snow was cold, where the stars went during the day. Eleanor's voice was gentle with memory. The night before she got sick, she asked me if people who died became stars. I told her yes. I said they watched over the people they loved. Do you believe that? I want to. When I look at the night sky, I imagine her up there, shining, waiting for me. She closed the locket. My husband couldn't see it that way. He could only see what we'd lost, not what we'd had. The joy turned to bitterness in him. He started drinking, started blaming. I tried to help him, but he didn't want help. He wanted someone to punish. So you left? 2 years ago. Took what money I'd saved from my sewing work and bought a train ticket west. Told myself I was going to Denver to start over. Took the stage from Silvermine because it was cheaper. She smiled sadly. Ended up stranded in the mountains with a man who understands. I'm glad the stage broke down. Eleanor looked at him, and something passed between them. An acknowledgement of shared pain, shared survival, shared hope for something better. When this is over, she said carefully, what will you do? I don't know. Haven't thought past surviving. Neither have I. But I find myself thinking about it now, about what comes after. Before Gideon could respond, his horse suddenly lifted its head, ears pricked forward. His hand went to his rifle. Someone's coming. They moved quickly, leading the horses into the trees. From their concealed position, they watched as 3 riders appeared on the trail below. Not Creed's men. These were different. Mountain men, by the look of them. Trappers or prospectors. Rough but not threatening. But Gideon noticed they were riding fast, pushing their horses harder than was wise on this terrain, running from something. One of the riders spotted their tracks in the snow and reined up. The others stopped beside him. Gideon could hear their voices carrying in the thin mountain air. Saw them torture him for information. Creed's gone mad, I tell you, killing anyone who might know about the gold. We should get to town, tell the law. Town's 2 days' ride. We'd never make it. They argued for a moment more, then rode on, still pushing hard. After they were out of sight, Eleanor turned to Gideon. Did you hear that? Creed's getting desperate. Means we're on the right track. It also means he's killing people. All the more reason to stop him. They rode on, more cautiously now. The sun was past its peak when they spotted the first signs that others had been this way recently. Horse tracks in the snow, a cold campfire, broken branches where men had pushed through the brush. Gideon studied the tracks. At least 4 horses, maybe 5. The tracks were heading in the same direction they were going. Creed's men. Likely. They're ahead of us, but not by much. Maybe an hour. Do we turn back? Gideon looked at the map again, then at the mountains ahead. Eagle Ridge was visible in the distance, a distinctive peak shaped like a bird's wing. We can't. If they reach the gold first, James has nothing. Sarah has nothing. Then we find another way to the mine. He studied the terrain, thinking. There was the main trail, which Creed's men were following. But Gideon knew these mountains. There were game trails, ridge routes, paths that only someone who'd spent years tracking prey would know. There's a harder way, steeper, more dangerous, but it'll get us there faster if we don't break our necks. Eleanor straightened in her saddle. Show me. They left the main trail and headed up a steep slope through dense timber. The horses struggled, but Eleanor proved her skill as a rider. She'd mentioned learning as a girl, and it showed. She moved with her horse, balanced and confident even on the treacherous ground. As they climbed, Gideon found himself watching her with growing admiration. She'd been thrust into a situation that would have broken most people. Hunted by killers, sleeping in a rough cabin, riding through dangerous country, and she'd met every challenge with quiet courage. "You're not what I expected," he said during a brief rest. She raised an eyebrow. "What did you expect?" "Someone who'd complain, who'd want to turn back, who'd be more burden than help. And instead, I've got the best trail partner I've had since my cavalry days." Eleanor smiled. "My father taught me to ride when I was 7. Said a lady should be comfortable on a horse. My mother thought it was unladylike. They compromised. I could ride, but I had to ride side saddle in public. And in private, I rode like the wind, free and fast." Her smile faded. I'd forgotten how that felt. Being free. They reached a ridge and looked down into a narrow valley. Below, almost hidden by trees, was a dark opening in the mountainside, the old mine shaft marked on the map, and surrounding it, visible as small figures in the distance, were at least 6 men. Creed had beaten them to it. Gideon swore softly. Eleanor moved beside him, studying the scene below. Now what? He thought fast. The men were focused on the mine entrance, probably trying to figure out how to get down the shaft safely. They hadn't posted sentries, arrogant or just careless. "We wait for dark," Gideon said. "Then we go in quiet, get the gold and get out before they know we're there." "And if they discover us?" He met her eyes. "Then we fight. But I'd rather avoid that if we can. Those are at least 6 guns down there. Maybe more inside the mine. So we need to be ghosts." "Exactly." They withdrew from the ridge and made camp in a sheltered hollow. No fire, they couldn't risk the smoke being seen. They ate cold rations and shared a blanket for warmth as the afternoon faded into evening. Eleanor sat close to him, and he was intensely aware of her presence, the warmth of her shoulder against his, the scent of her hair, the quiet strength she radiated. "Gideon," she said softly, "if something happens down there, nothing's going to happen. But if it does, I want you to know." She paused, choosing words carefully. "These weeks at your cabin, they've meant something. You've meant something." He turned to look at her. In the fading light, her face was soft, vulnerable in a way he'd never seen. "You've meant something to me too," he said. They sat in silence as darkness fell, their hands finding each other beneath the blanket, holding on like anchors in a storm. When full night came, Gideon checked his weapons and prepared to move. Eleanor did the same, her movements calm and purposeful. "Stay close," he whispered. "Step where I step. If shooting starts, get to cover and don't be a hero." "Same to you." He almost smiled. Then they were moving down the ridge, ghosts in the darkness, heading toward the mine and whatever waited in its depths. The descent took over an hour. Gideon led them down the steep slope with the care of a man who knew that one misplaced step could send rocks tumbling and alert everyone below. Eleanor followed in his footsteps exactly, making no more sound than a deer moving through timber. The mine entrance loomed larger as they approached. Gideon could see the orange glow of a campfire near the opening where Creed's men had set up. Voices carried in the cold night air, rough and impatient. They circled wide, using the darkness and the terrain. Gideon counted the men around the fire, 4 visible, which meant at least 2 more were either inside the mine or posted as sentries somewhere. He led Eleanor to a position behind a tumble of boulders about 50 yards from the mine entrance. From here, they could observe without being seen. They settled in to watch and wait. One of the men at the fire stood up, and even at this distance, Gideon recognized the shape and bearing. Dalton Creed. The false marshal was gesturing angrily, clearly frustrated. "Been down there twice," Creed's voice carried. "There's nothing but old timber and cave-ins. If the gold's there, it's buried deep." "Maybe your man had the location wrong," another voice suggested. "Or maybe that bastard Hartley has the real map," Creed shot back. "Which means Cross and that woman do too. We should have burned them out when we had the chance." "Still could. They can't stay in that cabin forever." "They're not in the cabin anymore, you fool. Tracks showed them heading north. They're coming here." Gideon and Eleanor exchanged a glance. Creed knew they were coming. The element of surprise was gone. "Then we set a trap," one of the men said. "Let them walk right into it." "That's exactly what we're doing." Creed's voice was cold. "Mitchell and Barnes are watching the main trail. Anyone comes that way, we'll know. Meanwhile, we find that gold tonight. I'm not leaving empty-handed." The men began preparing ropes and lanterns, getting ready to descend into the mine shaft. Gideon waited until they were distracted, then touched Eleanor's arm and gestured. They needed to move. They worked their way around to the far side of the mine entrance, where shadows were deepest. Gideon could see the shaft opening now, a vertical drop with an old wooden ladder disappearing down into darkness. The ladder looked ancient, some of the rungs broken or missing. 2 men descended with lanterns while Creed and the others waited above. This was their chance. Gideon pulled out his hunting knife, the blade his father had given him 30 years ago. The handle was worn smooth from use, the steel darkened with age but still sharp. He'd used this knife to skin elk, cut a rope, dig bullets from wounds. Now he might have to use it for something darker. He caught Eleanor's eye and pointed to the far side of the clearing. There was another opening there, barely visible. Probably a ventilation shaft or a secondary entrance. If they could reach it without being seen, they might be able to get into the mine from a different direction. Eleanor nodded, understanding. They moved together, low and quiet, using every bit of cover. Gideon's heart hammered, the old familiar feeling of combat rising in him. His senses were sharp, attuned to every sound and movement. They'd almost made it to the secondary shaft when Eleanor's boot caught on something. A rope stretched across the ground at ankle height. An alarm. Tin cans strung on the rope clattered loudly. "There!" someone shouted. "By the south shaft!" Gunfire erupted. Bullets whined off rocks as Gideon grabbed Eleanor's hand and dove into the shaft opening. They tumbled down a steep slope of loose rock and dirt, landing hard in a narrow tunnel. Above them, voices shouted orders. Lantern light flickered at the shaft entrance. "Move!" Gideon hissed. They scrambled deeper into the tunnel. It was barely wide enough to walk upright, the walls rough stone that scraped their shoulders. The darkness was absolute, except for the faint light from above. Behind them, someone was descending. They could hear boots scrabbling on rock, curses as the pursuer slipped. The tunnel branched. Gideon chose the left fork by instinct, pulling Eleanor after him. The passage narrowed further, forcing them to move sideways. Then it opened into a larger space, a natural cave that the miners had incorporated into their digging. Gideon stopped, listening. The footsteps behind them had stopped too. Their pursuer was being cautious now, aware that the hunted might turn into hunters in the darkness. Eleanor's breathing was quick but controlled. She still had the shotgun, he noted. Her hand found his in the dark and squeezed once, asking if he was all right. He squeezed back. A light appeared in the tunnel behind them, flickering lantern light, casting wild shadows. A man's voice called out, trying to sound confident, but with an edge of fear. "Cross, I know you're in here. There's no way out. Come on back, peaceful, and maybe Creed will let the woman live." Gideon didn't answer. Instead, he picked up a loose rock and threw it hard into a side passage. It clattered loudly, and the lantern light immediately swung that direction. The man moved toward the sound, his gun drawn. As he passed their position, Gideon moved. Years of training took over. Grab, twist, disarm. The man's gun clattered away as Gideon's knife pressed against his throat. "Make a sound and you die," Gideon whispered. The man froze, terrified. He was young, maybe 25, with the look of someone who'd thought this would be easy money. "How many men does Creed have?" Gideon demanded quietly. 8. No, 7 now. You killed one with that trap at your cabin. "Where's the gold?" "I don't know. I swear. Creed's the only one who knows for sure. He's got a piece of the map. The rest got burned when we attacked the mine." Eleanor picked up the man's lantern. In its light, Gideon could see genuine fear on the young man's face. "You've got a choice," Gideon said. "Turn around and walk out of this mine. Ride away and don't look back, or stay with Creed and die. Which is it?" I just needed the money. I got a family. Then go home to them. Now." Gideon released him and shoved him toward the tunnel. The man didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled away, leaving his gun and lantern behind. "Will he really leave?" Eleanor asked. "Maybe. Or maybe he'll bring the others down on us. Either way, we need to move fast." They took the lantern and moved deeper into the mine. The passages were a maze. Some natural, cave, some dug by miners, some collapsed and impassable. But Gideon had the blood-marked map memorized, and he followed its directions, counting paces and watching for landmarks. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, they found it. A section of tunnel where the walls showed pickaxe marks, where the dirt had been disturbed recently. Someone had been digging here. Eleanor held the lantern while Gideon examined the wall. There, a spot where the stones had been carefully fitted back together, but the mortar was fresh. He used his knife to pry at the stones. They came loose more easily than expected. Behind them was a hollow space, and inside the hollow, leather saddlebags stamped with the Silverton mine seal. Gideon pulled them out, his hand shaking slightly. He opened the first bag. Gold coins gleamed in the lantern light, hundreds of them. "We found it," Eleanor breathed. "Half of it anyway. There should be more." They searched the hollow and found 2 more bags. The weight was significant. This was easily $40,000 in gold, maybe more. But as Gideon hefted the bags, he noticed something else in the hollow. A piece of cloth, wrapped around something. He pulled it out carefully. Inside was a federal marshal's badge. A real one, not the fake Creed wore. And beneath it, a leather journal. Eleanor held the journal close to the light and opened it. The handwriting was neat, official. "It's a marshal's log," she said, reading quickly. Marshal Robert Clayton, assigned to investigate the Silverton robbery. Last entry is dated 3 months ago. She read aloud. Have tracked suspect Dalton Creed to the Eagle Ridge area. Evidence suggests he is the robbery's architect. Plan to arrest tomorrow. We'll need backup as Creed has at least 6 armed men. She turned the page. There were no more entries. He never made that arrest, Gideon said grimly. Eleanor kept reading earlier entries. Listen to this. Dalton Creed, real name Dalton James Wade. Wanted in New Mexico for armed robbery. Suspected in the deaths of 2 mine supervisors in Arizona. Known to use aliases and false credentials. Extremely dangerous. So the badge he's wearing is probably this marshal's. Creed killed him and took his identity. Gideon took the journal carefully. This was evidence. Real, damning evidence that could hang Creed and clear James. We need to get this to the real law, Eleanor said. First, we need to get out of this mine alive. As if in answer, a voice echoed through the tunnels. Creed's voice, magnified and distorted by the stone passages. Cross, I know you found it. I can give you 1 chance to live. Bring me the gold and walk away. You've got 5 minutes. Gideon looked at Eleanor. They both knew Creed was lying. The moment they showed themselves, they'd be killed. There has to be another way out, Eleanor said. Gideon remembered the map, remembered James saying something about multiple shafts. Oriented himself, thinking. This way, he said. They loaded the gold into a canvas sack they'd brought, along with the badge and journal. The weight was almost too much, but they managed. Then they moved deeper into the mine, away from Creed's voice, searching for salvation in the darkness. The tunnel narrowed until they were crawling, the gold sack dragging behind them, the lantern barely giving enough light to see. Gideon's shoulders scraped the walls, and his breath came hard. Behind them, they could hear Creed's men spreading through the mine, searching. Eleanor was breathing fast but steady, pushing herself forward despite the tight space. Gideon remembered she'd said she was afraid of enclosed spaces once, in passing. Yet here she was, crawling through a collapsing mine tunnel with killers behind her, not making a sound of complaint. The passage opened suddenly into a larger chamber. Gideon helped Eleanor through, then pulled the gold after them. They stood, catching their breath. This chamber was different from the others. The walls showed less tool marks, more natural formation, and along one wall, barely visible in the lamplight, was what looked like another body. Gideon approached carefully. The corpse was old, frozen by the mountain cold, partially buried under a rock fall. The clothes marked him as someone official, wearing a formal coat despite the mining setting. Eleanor came closer, holding the light. Another marshal. Gideon carefully moved rocks aside and examined the body. The man had been shot, a single bullet hole in the back of his skull. Execution style. He'd been dead for months, maybe longer. He searched the man's pockets and found a wallet. Inside was identification. Marshal Robert Clayton, exactly as the journal had named him. This was the federal marshal sent to investigate the Silverton robbery. Creed killed him, Eleanor whispered. Murdered a federal officer. But there was more. As Gideon moved the body to search more thoroughly, something fell from the coat's inner pocket. A small bundle of letters, preserved by the cold. Eleanor picked them up carefully. They were addressed to Marshal Robert Clayton, from his wife in Denver. Personal letters, loving letters. The most recent was dated 3 months ago. His wife has been waiting for him, Eleanor said softly, not knowing. Gideon felt cold rage building in his chest. Creed had killed 6 mine workers for gold, had framed an innocent man, and had murdered a federal marshal just trying to do his job, leaving a widow wondering where her husband was. He took the marshal's badge from the body carefully, with respect. It was tarnished but real, the federal seal clear. Between this and the journal, they had proof of Creed's crimes. But there was something else. Tucked in the marshal's belt was a leather pouch. Gideon opened it and found more papers, official documents, warrants, and a folded map similar to the one James had found. Eleanor spread the map under the lamplight. It showed the same territory, the same landmarks, but with different markings, more detail. This shows multiple cache locations, she said, tracing the marks. Creed didn't hide all the gold in one place. He split it up. Gideon studied the map. There were 3 marked locations, including this mine. The other 2 were marked in different areas, both within a day's ride. Smart, he admitted grudgingly. If one cache was found, he'd still have the others. Which means we haven't found all the evidence, just part of it. From somewhere in the tunnels behind them, a gunshot echoed, followed by shouting. Creed's men were getting nervous, shooting at shadows. "We need to move," Gideon said. But Eleanor was still examining the marshal's body, her face troubled. "Gideon, look at this." She'd found something in the marshal's coat pocket, a leather-bound Bible, small enough to fit in a hand. Pressed between the pages were dried flowers, and the book was marked at Psalms. She read softly, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul." Gideon watched her face in the lamplight, saw the emotion there. This marshal had been a man of faith, carrying his Bible even on a dangerous mission. And he'd died alone in this dark mine, murdered by the very criminal he'd been sent to catch. "We'll tell his wife," Gideon said quietly. "We'll make sure she knows what happened to him. And we'll make sure Creed pays for this." Eleanor nodded, carefully placing the Bible in her coat pocket. "For Marshal Clayton, for James, for everyone Creed has hurt." They were about to move when they heard a different sound, not the chaotic searching of Creed's men, but deliberate footsteps, someone who knew exactly where they were. A voice called from the tunnel they'd just crawled through, calm, measured, educated. "Mr. Cross, Miss Hartwell, I know you can hear me." It was Creed himself. "I'm impressed, I must admit. You found the gold, found Clayton's body, probably found his journal too. You're quite resourceful." A pause. "But you're also trapped. That tunnel you're in has no exit. I had my men collapse the far end 2 hours ago. The only way out is back through me." Gideon's jaw tightened. He looked around the chamber, searching for another way. The walls were solid rock, no visible passages except the one they'd come through. Creed continued, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "I want to propose a deal, a trade, if you will. You give me the gold and any evidence you've found. In return, I let you live." "Your word's not worth much," Gideon called back. A laugh. "Fair enough. But consider your position. You're trapped in a dead-end tunnel with limited air and no supplies. I can simply wait you out, or I can have my men start a fire at this end, smoke you out. Either way, you lose." Eleanor's hand found Gideon's in the darkness. He squeezed reassuringly, but his mind was racing. Creed was right about their position. They were trapped. "I'll give you 10 minutes to think about it," Creed said. "Then I'm sending my men in. And Mr. Cross, I should mention I know about you. Former cavalry scout, 2nd Company. Fought in the Indian Wars. Quite the tracker and fighter in your day. But your day was a long time ago. You're what, 45? 46? These are young men, and there's 6 of them. You won't win." The footsteps retreated, leaving them in lamplight and silence. Eleanor looked at him. "Is there really no other way out?" Gideon examined the walls carefully, running his hands over the rock, looking for any crack or passage. His cavalry training came back. Always have an exit strategy. Always know your terrain. Then he noticed something. Air movement. Just a faint current. But it was there, coming from high up on the wall where the rock face was uneven. He climbed up carefully, using cracks and ledges for handholds. About 12 feet up, hidden behind a jutting outcrop, was a narrow fissure. He couldn't see how far back it went, but air was definitely flowing through. He climbed back down. There might be a way, but it's tight and it goes up. We'd have to leave most of the gold. How much can we take? Enough to prove it exists. Maybe 10, 15 pounds of coins. The rest has to stay. Eleanor didn't hesitate. Then we take what we can carry and the evidence. The gold isn't worth our lives. They quickly redistributed the load. Gideon filled his pockets with gold coins and made a small bag for Eleanor to carry. The marshal's badge, journal, letters, and map they wrapped carefully in oilcloth. The rest of the gold, easily $35,000, they hid in a deep crack in the chamber wall, covering it with loose rocks. "If we don't make it," Gideon said, "at least Creed won't get it all. We'll make it." He looked at her, this refined woman from Philadelphia, who'd become a partner in a way he'd never expected. "You're sure about this? That fissure might not go anywhere." "I'm sure about you," she said simply. "If you think there's a chance, that's enough for me." Something shifted in Gideon's chest, a feeling he'd thought dead for 15 years. But there was no time to examine it now. He helped Eleanor climb first, guiding her feet to holds. She moved carefully but without panic. When she reached the fissure, she squeezed into it and began working her way up. Gideon followed, taking the lantern. The passage was barely wide enough for his shoulders. Rough rock scraped his back and chest. He had to turn sideways and shuffle upward, pushing with his feet, using his hands to find holds above. Eleanor was above him, moving steadily. He could hear her breathing, controlled and rhythmic. The woman had more courage than any soldier he'd served with. The passage angled sharply. For a terrifying moment, Gideon thought it was getting narrower, that they'd be stuck. But then it opened slightly and the airflow increased. "I see light," Eleanor called down softly. "Actual light." Gideon's heart surged. He pushed harder, ignoring the scrapes and bruises. Below them, muffled by rock, they heard Creed's voice, calling again, then shouting. He'd realized they weren't answering because they were gone. The fissure opened onto a ledge on the mountainside, hidden behind brush and rocks. They emerged into cold night air, gasping and bleeding from a dozen scrapes, but alive. The moon was up, casting silver light over the snow. From here, they could see the main mine entrance below, torches and lanterns marking where Creed's men were. "They don't know we're out," Eleanor whispered. "Not yet. But they will soon." They climbed down the mountainside, moving as quickly as they dared. Their horses were still where they'd left them, untouched. Creed had assumed they'd come on foot, or he simply hadn't found them yet. As they mounted up, Eleanor turned to Gideon. "Where now?" "Town. Sheriff Hastings. With what we have, he can contact the territorial governor, get real federal marshals up here. That's 2 days' ride, and Creed will be after us the moment he realizes we're gone. I know." They turned their horses south and rode hard into the night, carrying evidence that could hang Dalton Creed and save James Hartley. Behind them, a man's roar of rage echoed from the mine. Creed had discovered they'd escaped. The hunt was on. They rode through the night, pushing the horses as hard as they dared. The moon lit their way, turning the snow-covered landscape into a silver dreamscape. But there was no beauty in it for Gideon, only the knowledge that Creed and his men would be coming fast. Eleanor rode beside him, her face set with determination despite exhaustion. They'd been awake for nearly 24 hours, had crawled through a collapsing mine, and narrowly escaped death. But she showed no signs of giving up. As dawn approached, Gideon led them off the main trail into a dense stand of timber. They needed to rest the horses, and they needed to plan. They dismounted in a small clearing. The horses were lathered and blowing hard. Gideon checked them both, worried about pushing them too far. Eleanor pulled out their remaining supplies, some dried meat, hardtack, a canteen of water. "How far to town?" she asked. "At this pace, with rest stops, maybe 36 hours. But Creed knows the territory as well as I do. He'll try to cut us off." "Where?" Gideon pulled out his compass and oriented himself, thinking through the terrain. "There's a narrow pass about 10 miles south of here. Canyon Creek Pass. Only real way through these mountains, unless you want to add 3 days to the journey. If I were Creed, that's where I'd set up an ambush." "Can we go around?" "Yes, but it adds time. And if Creed splits his men, he could cover both routes." Eleanor chewed the hardtack, thoughtfully. "What if we don't run? What if we prepare our own ambush?" Gideon looked at her. "Explain." "You said Creed has maybe 6 men left. We can't outrun them for 2 days. Eventually they'll catch us, and when they do, we'll be exhausted. But if we choose the ground, if we prepare, maybe we can even the odds." It was exactly what Gideon had been thinking, but hadn't wanted to suggest. Too dangerous. But Eleanor was right. Running would just delay the inevitable. "It's risky," he said. "Everything about this is risky. At least this way we're in control." He studied her face in the growing light. "You know there's a good chance we don't walk away from this." "I know. But I also know that James is counting on us. Sarah and Tommy are counting on us. Marshal Clayton's widow deserves answers. We don't have the luxury of playing it safe." Gideon nodded slowly. She was right. "All right. Canyon Creek Pass. We get there first. We set up. We make sure Creed doesn't leave that canyon alive." They mounted up again and rode hard for the pass. Gideon's mind was already working through tactics, drawing on years of cavalry experience. An ambush required preparation, discipline, and a cold willingness to kill. He had all 3. The question was whether Eleanor did. They reached Canyon Creek Pass by late morning. It was perfect ambush country, a narrow defile between high rock walls, maybe 50 yards long, with good positions above for shooters. The creek itself ran down the middle, partially frozen. Gideon immediately began planning. "We need to block the far end, make them commit to coming through. Then we hit them from above." They spent the next several hours preparing. Using rope and fallen logs, they created a barrier across the south end of the pass, not solid enough to stop men, but enough to slow them down and make them cluster together. Then Gideon positioned Eleanor on the east rim with the shotgun and his spare rifle. He took the west rim with his main rifle. The positions gave them crossfire and elevation advantage. "You don't have to kill anyone," he told her. "Just shoot close enough to keep them pinned. Make them keep their heads down." Eleanor loaded the shotgun with steady hands. "I'll do what needs doing." "I know, but I want you to know you don't have to." She met his eyes. "Gideon, these men murdered 6 innocent workers. They killed a federal marshal. They're hunting us to silence us. I'm not going to let moral qualms get us killed." He wanted to kiss her then, this brave woman who'd found steel in her core. Instead, he just nodded and moved to his position. They waited. The afternoon sun warmed the rocks slightly, but Gideon's hands stayed steady on his rifle. He'd done this before, many times. waited for an enemy to walk into a trap. The difference was that, back then, he'd had a platoon of trained soldiers. Now he had one woman with no combat experience. But that one woman was worth 10 ordinary soldiers. Around 3 in the afternoon, they heard it. Horses, moving fast, coming from the north. Gideon caught Eleanor's eye across the canyon. She nodded, ready. 6 riders came into view, led by Dalton Creed. They slowed as they entered the canyon, wary but not cautious enough. They spotted the barrier at the far end, and Creed raised a hand, halting his men. "Cross," Creed called. "I know you're here. No other way through." Gideon didn't answer. Let them wonder. Creed gestured, and 2 of his men dismounted, moving forward to examine the barrier. The others spread out, looking for threats. This was the moment. Gideon sighted carefully on the lead man approaching the barrier. Then he shifted his aim slightly and fired. The shot echoed like thunder in the canyon. The bullet struck the ground inches from the man's feet. The man dove for cover, and chaos erupted. Eleanor fired the shotgun from her position, the blast echoing. She wasn't aiming to kill, but the spread hit one of the mounted men's horse. The animal reared, throwing its rider. Creed's remaining men returned fire wildly, not sure where the shots were coming from. Bullets pinged off rocks near Gideon's position, but he was well protected. He worked the rifle's lever action, firing again. This shot was deliberate, aimed to wound, not kill. It caught one of Creed's men in the shoulder, spinning him around. Eleanor fired again, and another horse bolted, scattering the group. "Up on the rims!" someone shouted. "They're above us!" Creed was trying to rally his men, but they were panicking. Caught in a crossfire with no cover, some started retreating back the way they'd come. "Stand your ground!" Creed roared. "There's only 2 of them!" But 3 of his men were already riding hard back north. The wounded man was dragging himself after them. That left only Creed and 1 other man in the canyon. Gideon could have killed them both. Easy shots, but he wanted Creed alive to face justice. "It's over, Creed," he called. "Throw down your weapons." Instead, Creed grabbed his remaining man, and they dove into the rocks at the canyon base, taking cover. From there, they had a defensible position. The standoff had changed. Now it was 4 people in a canyon, each with cover, each with guns. Gideon cursed silently. He'd hoped to end this clean. Now it was going to get messy. Creed's voice called from the rocks. "Nice try, Cross, but you can't hold this position. My men will come back with reinforcements." The ones who ran? I don't think so. They saw an easy paycheck turn into a death trap. They're halfway to the next territory by now. A bullet answered him, striking the rock near his head. Creed was a good shot. Eleanor fired from her position, keeping Creed pinned. But Gideon could see the problem. They were at a stalemate. If they tried to advance, Creed could pick them off. If they stayed here, night would fall and Creed could escape in darkness. Then he noticed something. The barrier they'd built was made partly from deadfall timber, dry wood, and Creed's position was directly downwind of it. He caught Eleanor's attention and gestured, "Cover me." She nodded and began firing steadily at Creed's position. Gideon moved quickly down from his rim position, using the rocks for cover. He reached the barrier and pulled out the matches he always carried. Within seconds he had a fire started in the dry wood. The wind caught it immediately, blowing smoke and flames directly toward Creed's hiding spot. "You son of a—" Creed's curse was cut off by coughing as smoke engulfed his position. 2 figures burst from the rocks, trying to escape the smoke. Creed and his man, running for their horses. Gideon was ready. He stepped into the open, rifle aimed. "Stop!" The other man stopped, hands up. But Creed spun, drawing a pistol. The shot came from above. Eleanor's rifle cracked, and Creed's gun flew from his hand, his fingers bleeding. She'd shot the gun right out of his grip. Creed stared up at the rim in shock, then at Gideon. then at his bleeding hand. "Like the lady said," Gideon spoke quietly. "It's over." He approached carefully, his rifle never wavering. The other man, barely more than a boy, was crying, hands raised. "Please don't shoot. I didn't want to be here. Creed said it was just a job. Get on your horse and ride," Gideon said. "Don't stop until you're out of Colorado." The boy didn't wait to be told twice. He mounted and galloped away, disappearing around the canyon bend. That left just Creed. Eleanor climbed down from her position, the rifle still ready. Together they approached the fallen criminal. Creed was on his knees, cradling his wounded hand, but his eyes were still full of hate. "You think you've won? You think the law will believe you over me?" Gideon pulled out the marshal's journal and dropped it at Creed's feet. "We have Marshal Clayton's journal, his badge, his body. We have the gold with your fingerprints all over it. We have James Hartley ready to testify. And we have witnesses to you claiming to be a federal marshal." He pulled out the marriage certificate Eleanor had been carrying. "And we have proof you abandoned your wife and child, that you're really Dalton James Wade, wanted in 3 territories." Creed's face went pale. "Where did you—" "Sarah Hartley was your wife. James is her brother. Funny how things come around, isn't it?" For the first time, genuine fear showed on Creed's face. Not fear of death or prison, but fear of exposure. His carefully built false identity crumbling. "Sarah," he whispered. "She's alive. Dying. Consumption. The medicine she needs costs money. The money you stole when you left her. The money you stole again when you killed those miners." Eleanor stepped forward. "You're going to hang Mr. Creed. Not just for the murders. Not just for killing a federal marshal. But for every life you've destroyed." Creed looked between them, seeing no mercy. "She sent you after me. Sarah sent you." "No," Gideon said. "She doesn't even know we exist. But we're going to make sure she gets justice anyway." He pulled rope from his saddlebag and bound Creed's hands. The man didn't resist. All the fight had gone out of him. As Gideon secured the knots, Eleanor stood watch, the rifle ready. The sun was dropping toward the western peaks, painting the canyon walls gold. "What now?" she asked. "Now we take him to Sheriff Hastings. Get real marshals up here. Find Clayton's body and give him a proper burial. Clear James's name." He looked at Creed. "And watch this man hang." They mounted up, with Creed tied to his saddle, and began the long ride south. But Gideon couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't quite over yet. They made a travois from branches and Creed's coat to carry the body. It seemed important not to leave him for the scavengers, despite everything he'd done. Eleanor helped secure the body without comment, her face thoughtful. "Why are we doing this?" she asked quietly. "Taking him with us?" "Because his body is evidence, and because even murderers deserve burial." She nodded, accepting this. They led the horses slowly down the mountain. Full darkness had fallen, and they had to move carefully. The temperature was dropping fast, and Gideon's shoulder throbbed where he'd wrenched it, catching the rock. Eleanor rode close beside him. "Are you hurt?" "I'll live." "That's not what I asked." He glanced at her and saw genuine concern on her face. "My shoulder. It'll be sore for a few days, but nothing's torn. I've had worse." "I'm sure you have." She was quiet for a moment. "When you were hanging there, when Creed was pulling you down, I thought I was going to lose you. But you didn't." "No. But I realized in that moment how much it would matter if I did." Gideon stopped his horse and turned to look at her properly. In the moonlight, her face was pale and beautiful and completely sincere. "Eleanor, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know." But he did need to say something. The words had been building in him for days, maybe weeks. When Catherine died, I thought I was done. With love, with connection, with everything that makes life more than just surviving. I built that cabin, and I told myself I was content. But you weren't. No, I was just hiding. Running, same as you. He reached across and took her hand. Then you showed up, stranded and scared, and you turned my hiding place into a home again. Eleanor's eyes glistened. I fell in love with a mountain man who came back early and found a stranger whispering for him to be quiet. I fell in love with a seamstress who had the courage to shelter a wounded fugitive and ride into danger with a stubborn old scout. They sat there on their horses, hands joined, the night cold but their hearts warm. Then Eleanor smiled through her tears. We should probably finish this before we freeze to death. Practical as always. They rode on, and within the hour they could see the lights of Silvermine in the valley below. The small town was quiet. Most folks already turned in for the night, but lamplight showed in the sheriff's office. Tom Hastings looked up as they entered, leading their horses with the travois. His eyes widened when he saw what they were carrying. "That's Creed," he said. "It is." Gideon dismounted stiffly. "He's wanted for the Silverton mine murders, the murder of federal marshal Robert Clayton, and about a dozen other crimes. We have evidence." Eleanor brought in the saddlebags with the gold, the marshal's journal, the badge, all of it. She laid it out on Hastings's desk methodically. The sheriff examined everything, his face growing grimmer with each item. "Where's Hartley?" "Hidden in my cabin. He's wounded but alive. He's innocent, Tom. Creed framed him." Hastings read through the marshal's journal, paying special attention to the entries about Creed's criminal history. When he finished, he sat back heavily. "Lord have mercy. This is bigger than I thought. I need to wire the territorial governor. Get real federal marshals out here. This is going to—" He stopped, looking at the body outside. "How'd he die?" "Fell," Gideon said simply. "Tried to escape, climbed too high, lost his footing." Hastings studied Gideon's face, then Eleanor's, then nodded slowly. "All right. I'll need full statements from both of you, and we need to bring Hartley in, get him medical attention." "There's more," Eleanor said. She explained about Sarah and Tommy in Denver, about the money needed for Sarah's treatment, about the reward money. Hastings made notes. "The territorial reward for recovering the Silverton gold is 5,000. That should be Hartley's, seeing as how he helped lead you to it. And there's probably a reward for Creed himself. I'll make sure it all goes to help his sister." "Thank you, Sheriff." They spent the next 2 hours giving statements, writing down everything that had happened. Hastings listened carefully, asking questions, making notes. When they finished, dawn was breaking outside. "You two should rest," Hastings said. "I'll send men up to your cabin for Hartley, and others to recover Marshal Clayton's body. This is going to take days to sort out. Maybe weeks." "We'll help however we can," Gideon said. "I know you will." Hastings paused. "You did good work here. Dangerous work, but good. The territory owes you." Outside, Gideon and Eleanor stood in the early morning light, exhausted, but relieved. The ordeal was finally over. "What now?" Eleanor asked. Gideon thought about his cabin, about the life he'd built there. But he also thought about how empty it had felt before Eleanor arrived, and how right it felt with her there. "Now we go home," he said. "Together if you'll have me." Eleanor's smile was like the sun coming up. "I thought you'd never ask." They walked toward the stable to arrange for fresh horses, their hands joined, their future uncertain, but finally, wonderfully hopeful. Behind them, Sheriff Hastings watched through his window and smiled. Some stories, he thought, did have happy endings after all. 3 months later, spring arrived in the Colorado mountains like a promise kept. The snow melted from the valleys first, revealing green meadows and wildflowers. The streams ran high with snowmelt, and the air smelled of pine and new growth. Eleanor stood on the porch of the cabin, watching Gideon work in the clearing. He was building an addition. 2 rooms, he'd said, for when they had visitors. But she knew what he really meant. Rooms for the family they both hoped to build. The cabin had changed in those 3 months. The bullet holes from Creed's attack had been repaired, new shutters hung at the windows, and inside, Eleanor's touch was everywhere. Curtains she'd sewn from fabric old Pete had ordered special, a rag rug she'd braided during the long winter evenings, Gideon's clothes mended and organized. But the biggest change was the quilt draped over the porch railing, airing in the spring sunshine. She'd finished it last week, working on it every evening by lamplight. It was made from pieces of her old dresses, the fine fabrics from her Philadelphia life, sewn together with squares cut from Gideon's old shirts and pieces of new material. The pattern showed old and new, woven together, creating something beautiful from disparate pieces. Much like their life together. They'd been married 2 months ago, a simple ceremony in Silvermine with Sheriff Hastings as witness. No fancy dress, no big celebration. Just 2 people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances, making promises they intended to keep. The sound of an approaching wagon made Eleanor shade her eyes and look down the trail. Her heart lifted when she recognized the driver. "Gideon, they're here." He set down his hammer and came to stand beside her, wiping sawdust from his hands. Together they watched as James Hartley drove the wagon up the last slope to the cabin. But James wasn't alone. Beside him sat a thin woman wrapped in a warm shawl, and in the wagon bed a small boy played with a wooden horse. Sarah and Tommy had come. Eleanor rushed down to greet them, and Gideon followed at a slower pace. James helped his sister down from the wagon carefully. She was still frail, still recovering, but there was color in her cheeks that hadn't been there in the photographs. "Eleanor," Sarah said warmly, embracing her. "It's so good to finally meet you. James has told me everything you did for him. We only did what was right. You saved his life. You saved mine, too." Sarah's eyes were bright with emotion. "The reward money. It paid for my treatment at the sanatorium in Colorado Springs. The doctors say I'm getting better, really better." Tommy had climbed down from the wagon and was staring at Gideon with wide eyes. "Are you the mountain man?" the boy asked. Gideon knelt down to the child's level. "I suppose I am. And who are you?" "Tommy. I'm 6. He held up the wooden horse. "Uncle James made this for me. He's a good carver. Maybe while you're visiting, I could teach you to carve too." The boy's face lit up. "Really? Really?" They gathered in the cabin, the space feeling full and alive in a way it hadn't been since Catherine died. Eleanor had prepared a meal. Nothing fancy, but made with care. They ate together, talking and laughing, sharing stories. James looked healthier too. His wounds had healed cleanly, and the shadow of being hunted was gone from his eyes. He'd been completely cleared of all charges, and the territorial governor had personally apologized for the ordeal. After the meal, while Tommy napped and the men talked outside, Eleanor and Sarah sat by the fire. Sarah held the quilt, admiring the stitching. "This is beautiful work," Sarah said. "Thank you. It's been therapeutic, I suppose, working with my hands, creating something new from old pieces." Sarah ran her fingers over the fabric. "James told me about your daughter, about Charlotte. I'm so sorry, and I'm sorry about what Creed put you through." Dalton. Sarah's voice was quiet. I haven't said that name in years. When James told me what happened, what he'd done, I didn't know what to feel. I'd grieved the loss of who I thought he was years ago. Finding out he'd become a murderer, it was like losing him all over again, in a different way. James said you wanted to know. Creed's last words. He asked us to tell you he was sorry. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. Was he? Really? I think so. I think in that last moment, he remembered who he could have been. It doesn't excuse what he did. But maybe it means some part of the man you married was still in there, buried deep. Thank you for telling me. It doesn't change anything, but somehow it helps to know. Sarah looked at Eleanor. You understand loss, real loss, but you also understand how to keep living after it. We both do. Eleanor took Sarah's hand. We're survivors, you and I. Outside, Gideon and James stood by the addition Gideon was building. James ran his hand over the smooth planks. You're building a life here, James said. Trying to. It's strange, after so many years alone, learning to share space again. But good strange. Eleanor's good for you. I can see it. She is. Saved my life in more ways than one. Gideon looked at the younger man. What about you? What's next? Sarah wants to stay in Colorado, near the mountains. She says the air is good for her. I've been offered a job at a mining operation near Denver. Legitimate this time, with proper safety measures. It's steady work, good pay. I can take care of her and Tommy. Good. You deserve that. They stood in comfortable silence, watching Tommy play in the clearing. The boy was making his wooden horse jump over rocks, lost in imagination. He doesn't remember Dalton, James said. I'm glad for that. He'll grow up knowing his mother is strong, that his uncle loves him, that good people exist in the world. That's all any child needs to know. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in gold and pink, the five of them gathered on the porch. Eleanor brought out the quilt and spread it over everyone's laps as they sat together, watching the day end. Tommy had fallen asleep against his mother, and Sarah's head rested on James's shoulder. Eleanor leaned into Gideon, his arm around her, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt completely at peace. Sometimes, Eleanor said softly, the thing you're running from leads you exactly where you need to be. Gideon kissed the top of her head. Sometimes it does. Above them, the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Eleanor thought of Charlotte, imagined her daughter as one of those bright points of light, watching over them. And she thought of the future, uncertain, full of challenges, but also full of hope. The quilt wrapped around them all, old and new woven together, keeping them warm as night fell on the mountains. Home, Eleanor thought. After so much wandering, so much pain, she'd finally found her way home. And beside her, Gideon Cross, who'd thought his heart had died 15 years ago, felt it beating strong and sure, full of love for the woman who'd brought him back to life. The mountain man had come back early and found a stranger in his cabin, and that stranger had become his salvation.